Easiest for us to just join the meeting and then share.
Is that how you usually do things, Jim? If they're doing a presentation, join the meeting and share?
I don't know.
Okay.
You did or didn't find the Wi-Fi?
No, I did. I just clicked when I work.
Okay.
Are you recording now?
Yeah.
Probably should have a few more minutes. Else to show up. We'll open the meeting, public meeting for the town plan. Meeting for December 8th, 2025. We probably ought to start with introductions. There's a couple people here I'm not really that familiar with. I'll start with myself. I'm Jim Robert, Chair of the Planning Commission.
Chair of the Planning Commission.
Lori Hellwig, Regional Planner with LCPC.
Seth Jensen, also with LCPC.
Roy Schiff, I'm a water resource engineer with SLR Consulting. Doug Osborne, also a water resource engineer with SLR.
Okay.
Linda Mark, Wolcott Select Board.
Okay. So well, I guess we can. We have Michael on now, right?
Yeah, I finally made it.
Okay. Have you had a chance to look at the minutes of the last meeting?
I have not.
Okay, well, we'll put that off for a bit and move right into the public meeting for the town plan.
Happy to provide a brief overview of the updates that were made to the plan and
Okay.
see if folks have any comments or questions. Over the past about year and a half, the Wolcott Planning Commission has been working with technical assistance from the LCPC to draft an updated municipal development plan for the town of Wolcott. Some major changes to the chapters in the plan are as follows. For the housing chapter, there was some updates to the narrative and charts and graphs to align with the latest census data and housing needs assessment data, as well as changes to Act 47 and Act 181 with additional housing targets for the town. The Public Services and Community Facilities chapter was updated with additional language about the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail and the new Wolcott Community Forest. New policies were also added on topics of recreation and health equity. There was a substantial update to the health and wellness chapter, and it incorporated concepts of health equity as well. Information on early childhood education services and tuition school choice was clarified in education and childcare chapter. The transportation chapter was the transportation chapter added language in reference to the municipal roads general permit, micro transit service available through rural community transportation, and updated policies and recommendations for flood resiliency. The energy and utilities chapter was updated to comply with Act 174, including updated LEAP targets and information on renewable energy targets and inclusion of statewide energy goals and updates with the latest standards. The economic development chapter was updated to also include discussion of the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail and the new community wastewater project in Wolcott Village. The natural resources chapter was updated to comply with Act 171 and added new information about the town forest and flood resiliency. The Whetstone Mine was added as a historic resource in that chapter. Flood resiliency continued to be included throughout chapters of the municipal plan. References to the updated hazard mitigation plan were included, And new statewide housing targets were also referenced in the land use chapter.
Do you have any further comments to make on this, Linda?
The only comment that I made at the select board meeting that I see didn't get picked up was a recommendation in the, historical resource chapter on the structures. I suggested that, I know there's a map and I couldn't pull it up, my computer wouldn't pull it up, but the Greaves gravel house, I think I suggest you put like an E911 number with it because there's so many new people in town, younger people. I mean, I know where it is. Do you know where it is, Tim? No. Or the Dean House or the Ryder House. That was my suggestion because of course you can go and look at the map, but you got to stop what you're doing, go find the map, figure out what the number. If you just put next to some of these, the E911 address, I feel like it will be preserved for the future generations after we're gone. I'm gone. That's the only other suggestion I made.
Okay. So we discussed the 911 addresses a bit at our meeting. What did we come up with for?
I had started to coordinate with Bruce on gathering all the addresses for those, and he was still working with the listers as of this meeting to get all of the addresses. So maybe by the next planning commission meeting, we could have all of that finalized and
Okay,
include that in the update.
so that's still a work in progress then.
Okay. If Bruce, I mean, I could give it to you in 20 minutes, if Bruce is having a hard time with it.
Any other comments?
No, I think it looks a good job. It looks good.
Okay. Next steps.
There'll need to be a motion to approve submitting the plan for, well, after making the minor revisions, motion to approve submitting the plan to the select board for review and adoption.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the town plan as presented with the changes that were suggested by Linda about the 911 addresses to the select board?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second the motion.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion's passed.
Does
Yes.
the select board have to hold a public hearing?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
And I'm happy to follow up with you or Michael about the timing of that, since I know there's budget season and town meeting in the spring, so we can discuss what might work best for the select board.
Well, so with guess no further input from public or any of the members, we might as well move on to the next section. Would be flood recovery and resiliency planning. Sure.
Sure. So thank you for having LCPC and SLR to your meeting tonight to discuss flood resiliency planning in Wolcott in the region. The LCPC, as a part of the Northern Vermont Economic Development District, received a grant through the Economic Development Administration to work with partners across the region and communities along the Lamoille River for long-term recovery and resiliency planning. A part of that project also included funding to update the Lamoille River hydraulic flood model. And so SLR is here tonight to present their work on this and findings that pertain to Wolcott.
We have about 20-30 minute presentation that Doug and I are going to do today to review the Lamoille River hydraulic model, as well as some alternatives, flood mitigation alternatives we looked at around the town. And also to hear some feedback from y'all on thoughts about flooding and anything we can garner. So get started here. So the plan for today is discuss the extent of the new model that runs up and down the Lamoille and some tributaries like Wild Branch, Wolcott. Talk a little about the data, some of the results, the accuracy of a model like this, and what you can use it for to evaluate alternatives. And this is a watershed map of the Lamoille River. You can see on the right, the river flows from bottom right, upper left, so Hardwick, and you can see where Wolcott is, sandwiched between Hyde Park and Hardwick. The model's been extended. It's a little hard to see, but the areas outlined in red is where the model's extended. The squares show the dam. So this is a bit unique. Hydraulic models that map rivers and show how the flow moves through them are usually a lot smaller. So this is a very unique instance in Vermont and honestly around the country. We do a lot of hydraulic modeling all over New England and the US, and models are often a lot smaller ones. So it's an impressive tool that you can use for a whole host of reasons. Explain some of those. And here's a zoom in of Wolcott. And you can see the Wild Branch, we cover 38 miles, as well as the full main stem of the Lamoille coming through the area. And this includes the bridges and the Wolcott Dam that are on the river system. So the data that go into these models, the purple line represents a cross-section of the land. And we're going to look at a few figures. This is where they're stationed in the village here, and we're sitting right in the town office, which is above that line. And the river's flowing from the bottom of the screen to the top. And you can see some of the features around town. And as this updates, you'll see the topography. The river is the grayish green line, kind of thick line running bottom to top. And then that shows the elevation. So yellow is a little bit lower, green's middle, and then you can see it goes up to red and gray. That's climbing in elevation. So this is based off of the terrain from LiDAR. And then we've substituted in survey as well across the model. And these models work off of cross sections, which is a horizontal cut across the river, as if you're in a canoe, someone cut it right in front of you. And so we're looking left to right down the Lamoille across the village. You can see the valley wall way over on the left. And then you can see here's School Street is located here. And then there's a house here. And then we go down into the main stem of the river. And this is showing, for example, the 10-year flood level. One of the nice features of the models, you can put in different size floods. You can take buildings away, add structures, and do all sorts of changes in landscapes, test out alternatives.
Apologize for not being here.
We're just looking at some flood modeling that we're doing on the Lamoille and Wolcott.
Great, yeah.
This is again the Lamoille Basin, and these blue bubbles show where we've inserted flow into the model. So a hydraulic model, you put flow into it, you put the shape of the river, and then the flow rate moves down the river valley. And then we use this to evaluate a whole host of alternatives. Doug's going to show you some of the details, but evaluation of dams, bridges, culverts, floodplains, narrow spots in the river, constrictions, or wide floodplains. How much flood storage can you get? There's a big push around the state right now for finding areas where we can safely store floodwaters. to reduce impacts and flood levels around villages and communities. So what can these models tell us? So the most obvious thing is the flood surface, the water surface elevation. Where does the flood spread out to? This map shows the 25-year flood, flood that has a 4% chance of happening in a given year. And the really dark blue is the river channel itself. You can see in the 25-year flood, there could be 11.6 feet of water in that channel. Out on the floodplain, there's 3.5 feet. So we often will put on different size floods and see how those spread out and move through the system. This shows you the floodplain. You also can get the depth and velocity. So if you have erosion issues, you can look at the velocities and what you might need to do with the river to reduce that erosion, or if you needed to like add resistance or armoring or wood or whatever you want to do to try to stabilize the river. And then one of the big things as water flows down a river valley and the floodplain goes in and out, sometimes water backs up. And that's a really, really good use of the model is where is backwater taking place? And that's really what often drives the flood levels in our communities is there's a constriction in the valley, or it could be a bridge or even a dam or a rock ledge that pushes water back through the valley. So these models are really helpful to identify that. All the FEMA flood maps are made with models like this. So this is helpful to kind of explore those maps and with more current data and check how those maps look. And bridge scour, that's all done with these kind of models. This is another tool we look at. This is the profile. So rather than cut across the river, we're cutting all the way up and down the river. So the river's flowing from upper right to bottom left, and you can see the Wolcott Dam and the falls right below it, the Route 15 bridge, the rail trail bridge, School Street Bridge are currently under construction. And then the blue is, in this case, let's see, I think the 10-year floodwater level. So a small flood that we would see in the town. We often see these floods almost every year. They have a 10% chance of happening in the year. So these flood profiles are really important. If you look carefully, let's see if I can. Like sometimes you can see a little drop at a bridge, and that shows, or in this case, there's a ledge downstream of School Street Bridge. You see the bedrock, and that can push water back up and elevate it. So that might be a spot where you want to make a change. So I'll talk about that here in a second. And then the beauty of this model is this is about over 60 miles of river. So looking from way upstream on the right to Fairfax and Georgia at the bottom left. So the communities all along the Lamoille can use this tool for a variety of things. So this model was used to help size the School Street Bridge that's under construction. And like I said, we've looked at some flood mitigation alternatives. How accurate is a model like this? Well, this is a shot of the Wrong Way Bridge in Cambridge, showing a small flood that happened a few years ago down there. And what we did was we measured the water surface elevation difference from the water to the bottom quarter of the bridge. And you can see it varied a little bit across the river, 1.3, 1.4, 1 foot, and the model shows 1.6 feet. So typically we often get within about a foot of the high water marks. This is the village. USGS recorded high water marks during some of the recent flooding that happened in the area. And what you can see in the upper left is we're 0.2 feet lower for the same size flood than what was recorded in the field. And then we were about a foot higher for the 3 points to the right. And this is really common, and that's an objective to get within about a foot. And that means like if you wanted to use these models for comparing alternatives, existing versus proposed, they're accurate enough to do that.
Does the model itself use historic data?
The historic data, so this is historic data that went into it. Like
Right.
that minus 0.2 means that
Yeah.
the high water mark is 0.2 feet above what the model is saying. So we use that to validate the model, the historic data.
Okay.
We also will use historic floods. So you have to put the size of the flood in. So if we knew, for example, a flood came through that was 10,000 cubic feet per second, we put that in, compare the high water marks, and then we can really validate the model.
Yeah.
So we validated the whole model, and it's within about a foot of the reality.
You have access to the 1927 data? Probably not.
That's a good question. I mean, I would say sort of, like, we have historic flood accounts from the 27, we have photos from books.
Yeah.
And then some of the historic accounts, and then we have estimates of what those high water marks, because excuse me, what the flow was in the river.
Yeah.
So that was in most cases, that was the flood record in most of the rivers in Vermont. And we have looked at something like that in the flood.
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna say, there's two USGS gauges on the river, one in Johnson and one down in East Georgia. And the one in Johnson has a flow from the 1927 flood. So that's
Nice.
considered in developing the flows for the model.
Yeah. And then unfortunately, we have current flood data. Good for modeling, but bad for us who had to live through these flood issues. But we have 23 and 24 most recent floods that we've used to calibrate these models. One of the nice products of the output of the model is called depth mapping. And so this basically just shows the depth and the extent of the flooding. This is the 2-year flood. We call this a small flood, something we're seeing every year in the village. And we've called out a couple locations around this building, fire station, the highway, other spots. Now we have a medium flood, so something that has a little less chance of occurring. The river is still mostly containing the flood. Some of the low floodplains, like at the rec fields, are starting to flood. Now we're moving up to a medium flood. So this is a flood that has a 2% chance of happening in a given year, also known as the 50-year flood. You're starting to get some water influencing buildings around the village. And we jump to the 100-year flood. Some water's out in the wetlands around the rail trail, more impact on the buildings, and you're starting to get some deeper waters out on the floodplain. And now the floods we've seen out here are somewhere between the 100-year and the 500-year, which is shown now. And you can see that water is now impacting all around this building, around the community. And you start to get some pretty deep floodwaters. One interesting thing you can see is that the width of the floodplain is really changing through the village. You can see a constriction sort of right in this spot.
At the railroad bridge?
This is the rail trail bridge. And you can actually see the rail trail is crossing the river here. You can see the approaches to that bridge, and that is holding some water back. And you can see how the water spreads out upstream of that, and then downstream it goes through the bridge, and then it kind of spreads out a little more. So we'll talk a little more about this as Doug gets into the alternatives. I'm going to turn it over to him to talk about some of the flood mitigation options.
So just by kind of talking about some of the different alternatives we looked at, both in Wolcott and up and down the river. As Roy's talked about, constrictions are really, a really big one, a big focus. It's often a bridge that's backing up a lot of water is a kind of a low-hanging fruit that, if you're able to open up that bridge and lower the water profile upstream, you can make a big difference. And then floodplain reconnection, as Roy was talking about, there's a lot of push around the state now. It's something that can have the local benefits where if you're lowering the land next to the river, allowing water to spread out more readily, as opposed to needing to have a big flood to start to get out in the floodplain. Maybe you can lower the land so that it's flooding every couple of years.
You're lowering the natural floodplain or making reconnections to the natural floodplain?
Both. Often it is a place where there is historic fill. We've done projects that are one in Brattleboro that was a housing community that was built up next to the river, and then had routine flooding issues, and so there was an opportunity to move some of those buildings and then lower the land and as you're going down, you see that evidence of fill, that it wasn't all natural. And so that often is the case, but there are, sometimes just natural, high spots or, the floodplains build up over time with each flood, there's more sediment that settles out, and, can maybe actually raise the level of the floodplain naturally as well. And, we just wanted to show a couple of examples of projects that have occurred in the watershed. These are both down in village of Jeffersonville. The top one is a flood culvert that was installed 2019. Okay. So it has kind of seen the last few floods, and locals say it's been really successful as water kind of backs up into the village. This culvert is dry 364 days a year, but when there is a flood, it allows the flood waters that are backing up behind Route 15 into the village to leave the village more quickly and get back into the main stem of the miles. And then the lower photo is the rail trail going through Jeffersonville, where there was a small bridge about the size of just the left side of the bridge from the pier over. And this was a spot where we were able to open up the bridge, kind of that right side of it. On the right side of the pier was high, rail embankment that was lowered. It's a good example of a floodplain there. So that the channel is flowing through the left side of the bridge, and then with about that 2-year flood every other year or so, waters come up and then flood that right side of the bridge. And so instead of the water really backing up, it's able to get through that bridge in a more efficient manner. So here's a map of the locations that we looked at in town in this study. Most of these places were ones that were brought to us as routine flooding issues or spots that might be an opportunity for looking at a kind of bridge, or there may be, at the old town hall downstream, understood there's been some erosion of the bank. We looked at that bank as well. So just to jump into it, we're going to start on that downstream side, behind the old town hall and the post office. On the photo on the left there, it's hard to see, but there's some riprap and some active erosion on that bank that's really pretty close to the back of the building at this point. Something that the model can tell us is, of course, the depth of the water and the elevation, but also those velocities. And that can be really helpful in understanding what kind of protection is needed to protect bank and the building in that situation. So this is showing the velocities for the 100-year flow. The blues are your slow moving kind of ponded water on the sides and on the floodplain, and then the yellows and greens are faster, and the reds are the fastest moving water, up to over 10 feet per second in places in the channel. And what you see here is actually you're going from this narrower upstream section coming out of the School Street Bridge, and then it does widen out. And some of that has been the last few years of floods that have widened the channel, eaten away at the banks. And so because of that widening out, you do actually see the velocities drop a little bit, right in this spot behind the town hall. But the velocities upstream and downstream can kind of help guide what kind of what size riprap, what depth you need to really install a long acting protection of a building in that situation.
Is there a danger to the building, or is it you want to do something else with protecting the bank? I guess. Yeah.
This was.
It doesn't seem like
it's about 10 feet or so. It's really pretty close. Yeah. And there is, you can kind of see this photo downstream. There is kind of this jut out that it looks like there is some bedrock that it may be at a point where the bank's gotten to a point where it's kind of protected a bit by that downstream bedrock, but it is, it is a pretty vulnerable location. So it's a spot where, it's a little different than what we've been talking about with opportunities to lower flood levels, but, when we have our critical buildings and roads and infrastructure, the model can really help guide, what is a lasting protection plan for these spots.
So it seems like a real problem as you look at the rivers below that with the restriction that you see to the upper left. I mean, isn't that what's really causing a problem down below there with the high velocity?
Right, yeah. And this area is, it's a lot of bedrock. That's just a pretty fast moving section of the river generally. It's actually really different than as we move upstream here, and it's a much more gradual flat section of the river. So it is a function of that steepness of the river and the bedrock cascading through there. So we're going to move upstream, just talk about the School Street Bridge a little bit. Here's a photo of our current School Street Bridge that is very actively under construction. We just wanted to look at that now that we have this more built out model. What does that new bridge look like in this setting, and how does it compare to the existing bridge? And I just want to flip back and forth a little bit with the terrain. If you keep an eye here, these are the approaches and then the bridge crossing the river. And what you can kind of see, as Roy was talking about, that upstream you've got really wide, broad floodplains, and it's really narrowing down into this spot where it's the steeper, bedrock cascading. And there is certainly, you can see the roads approaching on each side are kind of infringing on the floodplains, but it's already a naturally narrowing spot that the bridge is located at. And kind of because of that, what we saw when we put in the wider bridge that's going in, the existing bridge is about 100 feet span across the river, and the proposed bridge is about 129 feet. So it's expanding almost 30 feet to allow more of the river to flow through, and that does offer some flood reduction. Just in the immediate vicinity of the bridge, we are seeing for the large floods up to about a half foot of flood reduction just on the upstream side of the bridge. And here we're showing small flood is about that 2-year flood again, and then medium flood is a 10-year, and the large flood is the 100-year in this instance. And that benefit kind of reduces as you look at the lesser flood scenarios.
And as you go further upstream, that diminishes also.
Yeah.
To the point where you get up here, it probably amounts to nothing.
It's a perfect segue into, this is again a profile with the School Street Bridge on the left. And then moving upstream, here's the main village area. We're sitting somewhere right in here. And then the rail trail bridge up on the right side. And that is what you see, just upstream, you're seeing a bigger difference. The blue line, a little hard to see apart, but the top blue line is the existing conditions, and then there's a purple line, and then there's an orange line I'll talk about in a second. That purple line is the bridge that's being put in. So just upstream is about a half a foot for the 100-year flood, but as we move upstream, it does reduce down to, by the time we're up here in the village, it's about 0.2 of a foot of reduction. And something that we wanted to look at, just even though the bridge is currently under construction, is just see if it really is offering the benefits that we would hope when we're installing, going through all the resources and effort to install a new bridge. And so what we did was we put in something that may or may not be realistic, but a 200-foot span bridge, like about double what the current one is. And even with that much wider bridge, you still only see moving upstream about 0.4 of a foot of reduction. So it is an instance where, we're going wider and we're getting some of that benefit, what's realistic of putting in, in every setting is, a consideration whenever a project like this is happening. And, it seems like V-Trans has kind of reached a happy medium with providing some flood benefit and, allowing, space for, the water and debris, trees, and, if there's ice jams and such that.
So I'm thinking that the water backs up behind the bridge, so the restriction at the bridge, water backs up. But it's got a little flood area up here, so it doesn't, and like you said, it didn't really create a problem up here, a big problem. So why is the restriction there much of a problem?
Well, it's a problem in so that what we wanted to see was, is it making flooding worse for these homes, for, the area around the town hall here,
Right.
Upstream. Sometimes these things can extend, a mile upstream. And
Yeah, no, do what you can.
And you're looking at it like 100-foot span versus 129-foot span.
Right.
Versus no span.
Versus a giant 200-foot
Right.
span. Exactly. Yeah. And I think what it points to, in this instance, we've found that, there's probably not a realistic scenario that really reduces, this kind of bump in the profile that we're seeing. But it gives us the confidence that the bridge that's going in is relatively appropriate for this spot.
And the difference downstream would be even less, probably.
Yeah, you're not going to see difference, beyond immediately downstream.
Velocity might go up a bit. No, I mean, I'm sorry, like I said, it would go down, the velocity. Wider span, your velocity would go down.
Yep.
Collects below the bridge in a huge way as a pond.
But you can kind of see in this profile, the water surface lines come back together pretty quickly. Because we're not seeing a big change in that water surface, and downstream, you don't see it impacting the downstream side. So continuing upstream, we were asked about the kind of the town office and library and surrounding buildings, and I understand there's some utility elevating going on, just to understand how does that compare to the flood levels that we're modeling, and can kind of help drive the decisions of how high should you move the utilities, or what is relatively safe. And so what we're going to look at there is another depth map. What I'm showing now is the 500-year depth. So our biggest scenario that we've modeled, and it's something that's even bigger than what we saw July of 23 and other recent floods. And what we have is a couple of survey points. We hired a surveyor to go out and collect survey points of the thresholds of some of the buildings right around town. And they're a little hard to read, but for the building we're in at the moment, the threshold is just over 700.2. And what we see is for the 500-year flood, we're modeling that the flood would be about 699.2. I understand there was some water in the basement during the July 23 flood, but maybe not in the building itself.
Here,
Right.
I don't think there is a basement.
There is no basement.
Across the street, I mean, most of those houses across the street have
Oh,
water
maybe that's-
in the basement substantially.
Did water come in this building?
The sunken section where the boiler is, there was water there, I think.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
It's on the utility pit. I think
Okay.
the utility, that's what is reported.
Okay.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense with what we're seeing in the modeling.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think looking at these results can really help guide, understanding that for this biggest 500-year flood that we're looking at, the building is, a little bit above it, again, thinking about the accuracy of the model and, and the flood events that we really, could have, it's kind of right on the edge. And, considering that when placing utilities and assessing risk is certainly necessary going forward. And even more so as we move upstream and look at the fire station, which was a spot where we understood there was quite a bit of flooding and damage in the last couple of years. And so, when we look at the 500-year flood there, and again, this is something bigger. We have these black points are survey points around the fire station itself. We also have some on the bridge. We actually have right here one of our USGS measured high water marks from the July 23 flood. So they went out and identified that the flood was about 700.7 feet, which I think based on accounts in town, it sounds about right that there was a couple feet of water up against the fire station there. And what we're seeing for the 500-year flood is there would be about 3 additional feet of water over that July of 23 scenario. So, really getting to a point where you're just seeing a lot of, up to 5 feet of water up against the building. And, understanding how and whether you are able to protect against that is kind of something to consider in decisions about the location of the building and its resources.
It seems like a really big jump to go to 500 years. What do you suppose the profile looks like? Let's say the probability of flooding to some depth looks like as you go through 100 years, 200 years, whatever. What does that profile look like? It's really a climate change thing, I guess. But why would we pick 500 years?
Yeah, well,
It's a long time.
It is a long time, and we call it the 500 year. It all kind of comes back to level of risk acceptance.
Right.
And as Roy was mentioning, the 10-year flood, we call it the 10-year flood. It means there's about a 10% chance that it happens in any given year. The 100-year flood has about a 1% chance of happening in any given year. And then the 500-year flood, you get up to, there's only a 0.2% chance. But as you mentioned, these they're changing. And what we may have thought was the 100-year flood 15 years ago, before we've experienced more and bigger floods, has grown. And so, when we're looking at the flow data, and you see that in the last 25 years, we've experienced most of our biggest floods. Sort of 1927 sticks out as the giant flood in the way past, and then it's only in the last 25 years that we're seeing big floods.
It'd be nice to see that curve at 100 years, 150 years, 200 years, whatever, because it's really hard for people. I look at it, I go 500 years, forget it. It's not going to be.
I mean, we definitely thought about this. Yeah, it's a great point. And I don't know if you're going here, but we, as a society, we can't protect everything from the 500-year flood. Our state policy now is critical facilities at the state level, and communities are adopting this. They're protecting for 2 feet above the 500-year flood. Like the state building where we're having command centers when there's a hazard in the state.
What is the probability of 500 years?
If they do 500-year plus 2 feet, but a culvert is a 25-year flood typically in Vermont for the V-Trans manner, depending on the type of highway it is. So
But if it's 1% at 100 years, what is it at 500 years?
0.2
percentage probability?
0.2% per year.
0.2 linear?
0.2% chance of happening in a given year.
And linearly increasing as you.
Yeah, it's a linear. Yeah.
So this is sort of what you were at. Sort of what you're asking. We're only showing the 100-year flood here, but how we arrive at these values is based on looking at the biggest flood in each year that we have data
Okay,
from.
sure.
And so this on the left, this is a plot of the biggest flood of each year at that gauge in Johnson. And so you see it started, there were a couple of points before 1920, and then there were no points for a few years. And then we have this big point in 1927. And then each of these points corresponds to the biggest flood from that given year up until we get to 23 and 24. And, you know, as we are just kind of talking about, you know, you see all these floods from 1927 until about 1995 are kind of all in a similar range, peaking at, you know, between 10 and 20,000. And then in our last 20 years or so, we have 1995, 2011, 23, 24, and those are all, you know, all kind of showing bigger floods than we saw really for almost 100 years. And so you take that data and you say, you know, what value is there 1% chance of seeing each year? So the 100-year flood, there's 1% chance we see it this year, there's 1% chance we see it next year, and so on. And so in 1980, FEMA released their older maps, and they calculated a 100-year flood of about 19,000 CFS. But that's only based on the data up to there, right? And so now we have, you know, 45 years of additional data, and now we've calculated our 100-year flood is about 22,800 CFS. So, you know,
So did somebody draw, you fit a straight line or a straight line, I guess, through that last few years? And you extended that up into the 200 years or whatever, or somebody did.
Yeah, it's
That right?
it's
So we're assuming it will be linear or probably will be worse than these. But yeah, okay.
okay.
So there you go.
You know, this is really getting kind of into the weeds, but that is what, you know, that's what this looks like. You know, you line up each successive data point, and you look at that curve and kind of pull from it what is the 100-year, what is the 500-year.
Okay.
So you're asking the good in-depth questions. These are slides you keep in case those questions are brought up. So continuing upstream, we have a photo of the rail trail bridge and the aftermath of July 23. You know, one limitation of the model is it's modeling what we call clear flow. You know, it doesn't provide easy ways to say, okay, we have 10 trees moving down the river. How are those going to get caught up on this bridge? And unfortunately, you know, we can say, you know, we're going to block, you know, a couple additional feet of this opening because that's about how much debris we saw. But, you know, it is one of the limitations of this type of model. You know, and that's what you kind of see. And anecdotally, what we understand kind of happened at this bridge was debris was getting caught, backed up water, and then caused it to kind of move around, you know, onto the street and into the nearby buildings. Just kind of looking at another view and the terrain here. So again, the rail trail is coming across here and then connecting with School Street. And so you do see that on this side, it's kind of cutting across that lower floodplain. You know, a lot of the time we see this with either the rail trail or Route 15 or other bridges where, you know, it's not just the bridge itself, but it's kind of the approach and the embankment that may cut off kind of the flow paths, you know, on the floodplains. So we wanted to look at this spot and see if, you know, there were any alternatives that would help kind of alleviate, you know, the flooding as it moves upstream, you know, into the confluence area and the park on this upstream end of town. And so what I'm showing here is I looked at adding kind of a second bridge next to the existing one. And that's about 50 feet wide. It's about half the span of the existing rail bridge. To see, you know, sometimes you can keep that existing bridge in place and then say, okay, I'm gonna put another either culvert or bridge through the embankment so that, under flood scenarios, the floodwaters start to go through that secondary opening. Unfortunately, what we're seeing here is that it doesn't provide much change to the flood levels upstream. For each of the floods we're showing here, it's less than 1/10 of a foot of change upstream. And kind of why we think that is that actually, if we go back to the train, sort of similar to the School Street Bridge downstream, the bridge and its embankment is certainly kind of cutting across the floodplain and creating constriction, but there's a lot of other pieces of infrastructure, the School Street itself, natural constrictions like this highland here, and then kind of just downstream and even connecting to the rail trail embankment is this property, home here, and driveway. So the bridge itself isn't the only constriction that's going on in this spot. So unfortunately, just putting in an additional overflow bridge wouldn't make a huge amount of difference in the modeling. It is worth thinking about. When we see those photos of how much debris was getting caught up on the bridge, that when providing another spot for that debris to get through, or if the main structure is starting to get clogged, another spot for water to move through rather than jumping up and onto the street is certainly valuable, and it's something that is a little hard to show with this type of model.
So is that because your model isn't figuring in that debris? And it's just figuring in the open space, and the water never actually filled the open space over there?
Yeah, it does. The 100-year flood you can see is just starting to get, starting to hit those, the steel beams at the bottom of the bridge. But it seems like during July 23 that, because the water was right up there, all of a sudden you had trees that were able to just start sticking to the bridge. And, once you get that, it can really, just kind of accelerate in a way that we're not seeing in the model here.
This is like kind of a fundamental flaw of how we design bridges in our past, because we all know, like, when there's a big flood, it's the debris and the sediment often that are downfall to our structures. So like now the recommendations are leave 20% of vertical space, or a couple of feet usually in a bigger bridge, at your design flood. So if I want to fit 100-year flood through the bridge, I leave a couple of feet in there, above that, so the trees can go through it. And that's how you design bridges now. That's what a lot of the agencies of transportation in New England are doing right now, changing their design approach.
But actually, after kind of seeing those results, it prompted us to think about, what if the bridge just wasn't there? Let's just remove the bridge, see, what would the water surface profile look like without the rail trail bridge, just theoretically. And here we're looking again at our large 100-year, medium about 10-year, and small 2-year floods. The blue lines for each is the existing, and then the purple is, in that scenario where the bridge is just not there. And, we don't see a lot of reduction, about 0.7 feet for that largest flood. So, that kind of tells us again that the bridge isn't the only factor at play there. Just changing the bridge, there is some potential, to reduce flood levels upstream, but it's bigger than that. But as Roy mentioned, we are seeing that 100-year flood is just hitting the bridge itself, which is where you really, do start to experience those debris issues and clogging. Certainly something to keep in mind for the bridge's future. It's accommodating that debris as well. And then finally, we're going to move upstream of the bridge, to what's been kind of a recent and active project. In the last couple of years, initially after the July 23 flood, we came out here with LCPC and a few folks from the town to kind of survey the damage that was experienced on Flatiron Road. You know, upstream, as we get closer to the Route 15 bridge, where the flow comes through the bridge and gets down into this kind of narrow opening. There's a lot of bedrock. There's some old abutments that are remaining from the old Route 15 bridge. And then, the floodwaters were able to jump up onto Flatiron Road and really gouged out the road surface itself before spreading out onto the park downstream. And so what we had looked at, and there's a design in place. Unfortunately, it didn't receive any funding in the recent cycles of funding, but there's a design in place, and we think it's still a worthwhile spot to consider. What we're showing is a floodplain restoration on the right side of the river here, and then I'll move to a couple more images as well. But there are a couple of abutments that were left in the river when the old Route 15 bridge was taken down and moved upstream. And we do see that those kind of shunt water towards Flatiron Road, and are making that situation worse. And this is kind of a valuable spot just upstream of the village. When you're thinking about the debris that's getting stuck in the rail trail bridge, or maybe getting stuck on School Street, we provide more space where we lower the land and allow the floodwaters and debris to kind of spread out before they get to those spots. Then it kind of can really lower our risks as we get into our village setting. So again, here's kind of what the terrain looks like. And it's a little hard to tell here, but this area on the right that we're proposing lowering, you just see the call out for the old Route 15 road, is a bit higher than the fields across the river. So lowering those would kind of make them the preferential first spot that flooding would start to occur, somewhere where we're not trying to maintain rec fields and have spots for people to use. This is what kind of the initial 10% design, we're calling it, looks like. This is the footprint of land that would be lowered. The average depth, it was about 3 feet, and that whole area would be lowered to be accessible for those small and medium floods, as opposed to it takes a pretty big flood to get out of that space under current conditions. And then we're showing on the upstream side lowering, removing the old abutments, and there's some rock and debris kind of left on this island that's really forcing the water to go right up against the road here. I'll linger on that in case there's any questions. And those are what we've looked at in this analysis. Curious to hear your thoughts. Other places that.
One thing I was wondering is, does the model look at the repositories or the flooded area, the volume of water, if you will? So, I mean, there was a dam where you're talking about, there used to be a dam there. There was a big pond behind it, a huge pond behind it. I've got pictures of the river from all the way down by the town hall, all the way up to the railroad bridge, with logs floating in the entire river. So the river's full of logs all the way up. The dam causes the water to. So you get these big repositories. Does the model take care of looking at them as collections of a place to put water?
Yeah. This type of modeling, its advantage is that we can look over long expanses of river. One of the downsides is it doesn't do a great job of accounting for those storage areas.
Sure.
So it's looking at that peak flow as it's moving down the river. But if you have, a spot where if you put in a floodplain that allows water to spread out and slow down and actually kind of reduces the peak volume of flow downstream, it's something that there's different models with higher detail and there's trade-offs to what this is a great planning model that allows us to look at alternatives quickly, kind of all over the watershed.
Yeah.
And then, if there's spots that are of interest, then we can do more detailed modeling to understand kind of those changes.
I do have drone pictures of the morning after the flood up and down the Lamoille through Wolcott. If you, I don't know what you can measure from the velocity of the water from those or not, but if you want those, you're welcome to them.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You
You can add to that.
I think that's good. I mean, I think I've noted this in our discussions about Flat Iron Road and the project development process in the past, but as that progresses through design, thinking about are there ways with the topography or structural intervention to capture some of the debris, so it doesn't create that ponding and dam effect. Is the takeaway from this, though, that trying to create a second opening at the LVR2 bridge doesn't have the same benefit as it does in some other locations that you looked at?
Yeah, I'd say that's accurate.
Okay.
Kind of, yeah, like you said, in other places, up and down the river, we see that, there is an opportunity where putting in an overflow culvert or a wider bridge makes a big difference. Unfortunately, in these settings, we're not seeing that as much.
Okay.
It does feel like in some of these structures, that there's like such fill approaching them that you'd have to really like pull everything back. It would be like a huge change in the village. And maybe at some point, if you reach that point to make that, but the normal things we do, like expanding the bridge a little bit, because one of the big issues there, Doug, you were showing, I mean, there's a house right downstream. And it looks like there might have been some fill between the embankment, the house, the driveway.
Yeah.
So that whole floodplain now sits elevated to protect the house that was put in there. So if you poke a hole through, you're only operating another little piece of that floodplain. Whereas if you look, like that floodplain was way wider. And so like you see this in a lot of communities where there's just been generations of small encroachments and filling into like protect the road or to cross the river, dams, mills, houses. And now we're kind of here and you just see these constant like dips in the profile where the water's just kind of backed up in our communities. Some are really exploring like taking the bridges out and pulling way back where they have redundant bridges or there were some buyouts with the flooding, but here in this community, it feels like there aren't a lot of obvious opportunities to like get that flood moving through the village and drop those levels. You can do small things like the School Street Bridge, small improvement. But like if you took out all those approaches, like right up to the highway and pulled all that way out, you'd probably drop the flood levels a bit more. But it'd be a drastic change to the community. You won't be able to cross the river there.
Yeah.
So
what has happened in Wolcott, though, since the flood is south of that bridge, so there've been a lot of the buyouts, the most vulnerable area. The rest of the village with the wastewater project is moving the most vulnerable subsurface infrastructure. And then with the School Street Bridge, there is roughly like a little less to half a foot to a tenth of a foot, depending on where you are. So
that's right.
It's not, there's a lot of small things that can add to protection or but it's not like in some communities like Jeffersonville where we were able to see like two things
Yeah, like
fundamentally
completely changed. And that's because they were in a really it's really a community that's in a drastic spot where there's like really obvious flood issues. That's where you can really make a quick change. And one thing I always say is that, you know, it's been a couple hundred years of like slowly filling and putting all this infrastructure there. And it's not a one-time thing. It's like every project you do, if you can use this model and see, okay, how can I, if there is a buyout or there's a bridge, how can I slowly pull back a little bit to keep dropping those flood levels? And like all the projects you mentioned are definitely a huge step forward for the village. And then this model will be available, you know, for future projects if anybody wanted to make a change around any of this infrastructure or these buildings or a home. You could really explore, like, can I remove fill with this or
When would it be available?
I mean, I think the model
Is it available?
it's available and
What does it run on or in or?
it's a public domain computer program by the Army Corps of Engineers. That's sort of the industry standard for this kind of modeling. So anyone could really, I mean, there's a skill to like developing the model and running it. And I don't know if you guys want to mention like,
We're trying to host it on our website at LCPC
Oh, great.
so that the communities can use it in real time, but to be determined,
And it's
looks like.
possible. Alec and Conrad are trying to figure out how to add some of the more interactive elements of it. It's possible it will be like the static PDF that you can flip through and to get the data you need to make a request. But we're seeing if our internet hosting can do the more interactive.
I mean, the way the models are a little complicated. They're not super intuitive how to change them. We just work them a lot. But like if we have models in communities and let's say in a couple of years, someone was elevating building or doing a bridge, they would just request the model. And then whoever was designing that for you would take the model and work from there. It's like a much better place to start. You don't have to rebuild this whole thing. So that's probably the way, but you'd be able to see some of these flood maps and kind of locate where you are and then say, oh, here's the different size floods where I'm located. You can kind of readily look at the output.
The data that feeds the model, do you have that? Who has that data that really went into creating the model? Not creating the model, but creating the model, let's say. Do you folks?
Do you mean the flows or?
Yeah, I guess everything, all the data that goes into it, the flows, the geography, everything about it.
Yeah.
Where does that come from?
It kind of came in, a minute or two into a talk. So I don't know if you
Well,
saw these initial few slides.
Do you put some of that data in or is it?
It's all in there.
All of it?
Yeah.
Okay. So the model just cranks on whatever you put in, you say, the flows are this and.
Yeah,
Okay.
you put in the geometry and the flows, and then the model routes the flood downstream. So if you get the model, you kind of have the data.
Do we know what they're using for technology for the model?
I think he's asking because it's grass, right?
Yeah, it's called, HECRAS is the computer program, the Army Corps program. And then, it's the public domain version. There's a lot of private versions, but most people use the public one so you can readily share it. And then there's LiDAR elevation data that's got 1 foot contours, and then there's survey data that go into it. And then we have estimated flows, and we've got some new flows that FEMA just put out as part of the.
You have the LiDAR data?
Yeah.
Great.
It's available statewide. So we have really good contour data as well as some additional survey.
Can I get that data?
The LiDAR data is publicly available.
Let's say the whole thing. Is any of it transportable? I'd love to see some.
Like the LiDAR elevations themselves?
Well, I'm thinking too abstractly, there's a whole set of data that goes into this thing to make the estimates, and it would be interesting to see. Anyway, I'll just hold it around. Yeah,
Well, if you go to, have you heard of VCGI, Vermont Center for Geographic Information?
I only use it. No.
It's a state website, and they have this thing called the Vermont LiDAR Viewer. And you can literally just get into
Okay.
a map of Vermont and click around and see little snippets of the LiDAR. It's really helpful.
That gives us the light, the surface.
The ground elevation.
The height of everything, yeah, sure. Great.
And then the flows are estimates from FEMA. We have all of this, and there's going to be a report, so you'll be able to like look at that and see all the
Yeah,
things.
if I could work with you guys just a little bit to see what data we can get out of there. Great.
Linda, did you have your hand up?
Me?
Yeah, I thought I saw
Yes,
one.
I was just curious about the flood bench on the Fish and Wildlife property and just wondering, didn't you give some kind of ratios of how effective that would be in saving Flatiron? Do you have anything?
I don't have the specifics in the presentation here. But it's true, you know, especially on the upstream end because of the abutments and this constriction here, it
Right.
really removing them really does reduce the risk to Flatiron Road there.
And it appears that it would also widen out and be less flooding on School Street to those homes, but I was just curious if it's just my opinion or not.
No, it's true. It does, you know, creating this storage area does alleviate a little bit of you know, it's on the order of, you know, a few tenths, but it is, you know, there is a benefit.
Thank you.
That was very informational.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thanks for having us.
So, there was some discussion about the Flatiron Road mitigation project, and the select board has pursued funding for. Unfortunately, the applications for those have not moved forward. We're going to continue working with select board. One of the benefits of having this data, just for as the example of the School Street Bridge, is that we were able to share this with V-Trans early in the project development process for them to consider and modify infrastructure. So, and another thing about this is that now that the data is available, when opportunities arise, it can be fed in. So please keep thinking about ideas or opportunities so that we can use this. While the Flatiron Road implementation was not funded, the planning grant that LCPC submitted was, and that does include some additional funding to look at some of the alternatives from this in more detail, as well as a category for vulnerable infrastructure, such as the fire station and highway garage. So we'll be following up with the Planning Commission and the Select Board on that probably in the next 6 months or so as that works through. And this data of what are the vulnerabilities in the critical facilities along School Street will be really helpful, a starting point for that. That's it. Thanks very much for having us.
Well,
Oh, you're
thanks for
welcome.
coming.
Follow data in whatever form and version of the flood model that's able to be posted on our website is
Yeah.
available.
I think the best thing, if I could get pointers, which I can find them, but the LiDAR data and the the flow, the velocity data, that's the other thing you have, or whatever those major data sets are. And, yeah, I have a technical question. Language models, large language models, the AI thing. Has anybody done a flood, a modeling, a river modeling and flood modeling and all that language model? And do you see any effort going on in that area?
Well, we're starting to see, as people use these tools more, like we're starting to see some public models and like visualizations that use AI. So it's kind of it's a little untested and not the industry standard. Like what we showed you is kind of the standard for the industry right now.
Right.
But it feels like we're going that way in the future. We're starting to see signs of federal agencies like there's a national water model. They're doing AI simulations of flooding and whatnot, but right now they're not super accurate and they're not very reproducible. So we're kind of sticking with the tools that we know work. But it feels
My
like
guess is, I've done some work in this area, not with flooding, but my guess is if you fed all of that data into a large language model that was designed for the purpose of this kind of data, it would just tear that thing apart and you'd know everything about it. It's just, I'm a technologist, but that's kind of what I believe.
Well, we are working with, there's a group out of UVM, University of Vermont, that does a lot of large language modeling. And some of them are water resource engineers. And we're starting to look at what if you had to like optimize floodplain storage in the Lamoille River Basin, how would you do that?
Right.
So that's kind of a project that's starting to happen right now for a couple of years. It's probably going to develop some methodologies or so.
Super.
Stay tuned.
We gotta get hold of Russ.
The furnace went out at Fred's. I was down there fixing up the fire. Oh, I do have I don't brag about it, but I have a building right down there. I was looking at your maps very carefully because that's my building that sits there. It's high and dry pretty much compared with the flood levels, and the basement can flood without a problem. But then down below the town hall, I own Fred's, that's this yellow building, the white building, but the yellow building got flooded out, but didn't get bought out. So that basement flooded. Do we know anything about the buyout of that yellow building? It didn't happen.
Which one?
Oh, down by the town hall, it's the town hall, then Fred's New and Used, the white building, the yellow building flooded, and I heard it had a buyout offer that wasn't accepted.
I haven't seen that on the list. That might be the one that rejected the number.
Okay.
Where the model in Jeffersonville was also used for some of the one home, where the property owner, for a variety of reasons, chose not to do a buyout for determining an appropriate elevation.
Right.
Which for what's remaining on Route 15 and this side of School Street, it's another use of if property owners are looking at that. I'll say that with the preface that the FEMA process for funding elevations is very challenging. So the technical, how much to elevate, and then versus the engineering versus what FEMA wants you to do it, or perhaps a disconnect. But there's an engineering data to help with those discussions if a property owner wants to look into that.
That's a great start. It'd be great to have a model that was kind of local too, and could be spread to other places, but.
All right, well. On to our next thing there. Maintenance. That's our flood recovery and resiliency planning. On river model, and now LCPC as a presentation.
Sent this around via email. Also in the course of the projects that funded Solar's work. Um, some ongoing community engagement provided to communities along the main stem of the river. Wolcott Planning Commission and Forest Committee was interested in making lemonade out of lemons with the West River property. So some planning was done this spring with Michael and Gordon. We set up a site visit and walk with folks in the community and select board in June just to walk around this buyout on School Street, 64 School Street. It was previously known as the Westover property, and through the course of this project was dubbed Riverside Park. Some ideas were collected at that site walk, and then again at the Wolcott barbecue in August, in coordination with the Wolcott Community Trust. What folks would maybe want to see happen at that now town-owned property, that would be some like flood-friendly activities. So the first page of this is a map of the buyout property, but blue parcels along the river and the green parcels uphill, also abuts the new town forest. The second page takes some of the ideas that were collected at the sidewalk and the dot method used the barbecue and outlines potential future uses at the property, as well as other ongoing projects with the community trust and LBRT is all like outlined on that map. So there's different place-making activities village could work on. So like one idea that has come up a lot is like a pavilion area where folks could meet and have barbecues, river access, paddlers launch into the river there. And kind of maybe like a walking loop connecting with the LVRT and School Street around the village and connecting to some of these other community spaces that are blossoming at the old schoolhouse building and library. I don't know if you had a chance to review this in advance of the meeting and had any questions or things that jumped out to you.
I looked at it. So. Actually, the one question I did have was on that first page with the map. What is the lollipop up on? That goes up on the radar kind of forest property.
Oh, is just a proposed potential connection to the new community forest where the forest committee said there's like a nice lookout up there.
Okay.
So the town could explore like where that access might be best placed, and
Sure.
There's an old logging road that could potentially be used to get up to that nice overlook.
You don't have Jim's, yeah, do you?
There you go.
Great, sorry.
This was developed by Kate Lally at LCPC.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fun concepts in here that new groups like the Wolcott Arts Collaborative or Wolcott Community Trust could run with.
Like the third page, it shows a floodplain there, but when you look across, I haven't actually walked over there, but when you look across the river, some of what is showing us the floodplain looks like it rises up in elevation.
Yeah.
Probably magic.
We kind of looked at that. We had wondered if it was like fill or was it like
Yeah.
a natural feature? Because there's two that kind of jut out.
Yeah.
I think one where the house is and one where the shed is, or there's a couple buildings.
I think that
Smart.
The part that creates like a bend in the river across, probably getting kind of close to the town hall there.
no, the geology, so this is a little bit of extrapolating what is the topography from the trail, but there are some ridges of bedrock that kind of finger out.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's just the extension.
Just looking from across the river, you know, on the Route 15 side, it looks like it rises up fairly quickly right there.
But I think on the other side of it may come back down. I was noticing one of their maps shows a bump there that didn't have flooding, but on both sides it did.
But yeah, so
Maybe in revision, we could talk about if you're able to. If they'll get to flip that so that it's
Explore that a little more.
Right over floodplain in there. Yeah.
lowering that section that rises up.
The one that hits me is that really narrow restriction below the town hall, the ledges on both sides like this. What is the effect of that? Certainly, I would think the water downstream must be rushing like crazy
Yeah.
and wiping out like the church area and all that stuff. Big damage down there. So it backs up.
Right.
But not so bad that it's, and what's that?
I mean, it kind of like ponds the water up and then it shoots through that narrow spot.
Yes, yeah. Could you ever blast that kind of stuff? Or, I mean, it's a lot of work. We can make it
People
wider.
have, but it's not super common.
The state probably frowns on that.
Yeah, they're not into blasting.
And dredging.
Seems like that's the main restriction in the whole ball of wax here. Just intuitively, but I don't know.
That's fine.
That's fine, yeah. I just,
Once you took the bridge out, it was downstream, right?
Yeah.
The water sat on that.
Yeah.
That narrow spot.
you got a big pond up above it.
The rail trail's right tight to the river right there.
It takes out the rail, yeah. So it's going really fast, I guess, by the rail trail edge, yeah. Huh. That'll be fun to develop it further, maybe. You folks have more money to,
Yeah, we can explore some alternative. Look how far we're okay.
and walk it.
I don't like that spot yet.
Sure.
Okay, well, that's the School Street property, and then we didn't cover the LCPC presentation on the NPEDD recovery and resiliency plan, right?
That was less of a presentation, more of just an announcement.
Oh, okay.
That we are in the final stages of developing the long-term recovery and resiliency plan for the region, and that's incorporating some of the data gathered from that fun interactive survey we had with you back in March that we did on the laptops, cell phones. That will also be available on our website.
Okay. Oh, you have anything else that we need to address here?
Do you want to do your minutes?
Are you still online, Michael?
I am, and I looked at the minutes. I'd make a motion to approve.
Okay, a second,
What are you nominating for? I'm sorry.
the minutes.
Oh, yeah. Second them.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, minutes are approved.
Yay.
Any other business?
Nothing here.
Okay, well, not hearing any. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I will make that motion.
Second motion. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Adjourn. You got it. Thank you.
I have one other question about the discharge flows stop. 100 year. Is it going like down? Also for like low levels?
The variability is increasing. So it's